Less than half of young people are proud to be English and 1 in 10 is embarrassed. Now, we've never been outspoken in our patriotism. We don't share France or America's idealistic view of their national identity. And we are aware of the dangers of the sort of nationalism we see from Putin in Russia or Erdogan in Turkey. In fact, we were so shy that for many years, the only people who would proudly brandish the St. George's flag were those on the far right. And for we minorities growing up in England, the flag struck terror in our hearts as a symbol of neo-Nazi violence. Fortunately, those days are over and the flag has been reappropriated. But clearly, if I can get it out, but clearly, many people, particularly the young, are still squeamish about being English. I don't think that matters. What could be more English than such self-deprecation? But my message to the 1 in 10 who are embarrassed of our country is the following. Before you take your privilege for granted, have a chat to the refugees who gave up everything, risking their lives to come here. And if they don't remind you anything that redeems our country, then nothing will. Rachel.
Well, there is an old phrase, isn't there? To be born English is to win first prize in the lottery of life. And it's interesting that all the latest polling shows that the English are actually least proud about being English than the Scots are about being Scotch.
Indeed.
Or the Welsh are about being Welsh, or the Irish are about being Irish. And there's, you know, when you go abroad and you meet another English person, you don't cleave to them in the same way as a Scot might.
I found it fascinating because I did this debate on my LBC show, and English people ringing up and explaining why pride is... It doesn't make sense to be proud to be English because, of course, pride... being English is not an achievement, they said. We were born here. We didn't do anything to happen to be born here. We should be proud of our achievements. But the only few people that rang up and did say that they were proud to be English were asylum seekers. An Afghan asylum seeker rang and spoke to me at length about why he found himself expressing pride in having become British and getting the British, of course, passport and living in England, why he was proud to be English. And he was so thankful and grateful to his country. And that's what led me to think, OK, I'm not going to demand that we all express pride in being English, but certainly to be embarrassed to be English, I think, is a step too far for me.
I think we're, if it makes sense, I think we're quietly proud of not being proud, if that makes sense. I read it. I found a fantastic quote from Bill Bryson, who said, "What an enigma Britain will seem to historians when they look back on the second half of the 20th century. Here is a country that fought and won a noble war, dismantled a mighty empire in a generally benign and enlightened way, created a far-seeing welfare state, in short, did nearly everything right, and spent the rest of the century looking on itself as a chronic failure." And he says, to achieve so much and feel you haven't achieved enough is what I love about Britain. And I think that's true. And, you know, that report you're referring to, you know, it talks about young people not feeling patriotic. I think it's a bizarre concept for a young person. I think maybe you have to have lived a bit longer to have seen and experienced what your country does and the way it handles things before you might become patriotic. But I think if you said to young people, ask them individual questions like, you know, stuff about the fact we live in a democratic country, the fact that we champion freedom of speech. If you ask them stuff about that, they would call what they feel about that pride.
Before we go to you, Greg, and come to you in a second, we'll just have a look at the fact that this varies actually by region, from region to region. If you look at, for example, Lincolnshire and the Midlands, 90% of those areas identify as strongly English, whereas London, Oxford and Cambridge, only 32 to 45% of people in those areas identify as strongly English. And if you ask the question, who is proud to be English? 72% of those who responded yes were over 65, whereas only 45% of 18 to 24-year-olds responded with a yes. And 49% believe England's best years are over. 17% think they are still to come. Greg?
But both of you muddled up England and British in what you said, both of you.
I don't...
You used the words British, you used the words...
I said the Afghan asylum seeker acquired a British passport because we don't have an English passport.
But that seems to me the issue, is are we British or are we English? We don't... You can see why, if you go to Scotland or you go to Wales, you can go north... Less so, I would have thought, Northern Ireland, but there the identity is partly with the South. But you can see why they are so... You know, I'm a Scot. You know, you find them... Whereas I don't think England has the same identity. And your point there was about more regional identity, I think is right. I mean, I think, you know, these figures show you're more proud to be a Geordie than you are to be English.
No, I think that those figures were saying that those from those regions are more proud to be English than the Southerners
Yeah, so like
Yeah,
66% of people in Hull, for
Yeah.
example, are proud to be English. But
Yeah.
to your point, you said that when you go on holiday, you'll see the Scots coming together, but you won't see the English. And I got back today, actually, from Benidorm.
You lost your glasses on the plane?
I lost my glasses, yes, whilst I was there. But my point was that actually I had a very different experience. You know, the English were very much coming together, you know, whether it was in the bars together, whether it was in the sports activities.
That's not because you're on the Costa del Sol, though.
No, but what I'm saying is it was very
But you don't
much...
meet each other and say, oh, I'm English, you're English, like that.
Well, no, but my chat-off lines are a little bit better than walking up going, I'm English. I've got a bit more banter about me than that. But we don't help ourselves, though. Like, we don't have St George's Day, for example, as a bank holiday. I would argue that we should, and we should actually be more proud of ourselves.
I think one of the problems is the St George's flag. And
I tell you, we were petrified of this. Greg.
yeah, I mean,
it's a scary thing.
there became a confusion between nationalism and patriotism, and the emblem of that confusion was the St George's flag, and also of a certain type of Englishness. And when Emily Thornberry went, in 2014, she went down to the Essex by-election at Rochester and Strood, and she tweeted a picture of a kind of a white van in a driveway and a St George's flag draped windows, and said sort of Rochester scene or something like that on the tweet. She was regarded as very snobby because what we're also talking about is a sort of sense that, you know, metropolitan Londoners think of themselves as cosmopolitan and not necessarily very English. And there we'd had this woman from this Labour Shadow Attorney General leaving Islington and going out into the sort of provinces where white man van lived.
True, though.
And show what essentially that expressed to me. I'm not going to bring in Brexit, but the Brexit vote wasn't really a vote against Europe. It was a vote against London and sort of London metropolitan, cosmopolitan.
To your
values.
point about the flag, Tory MP Nick Bowles said this. We can place to your intro too. He says we've allowed the idea of Englishness practically to be seized, partly seized by the far right, and also to become associated with the idea of a race, white Anglo-Saxon, rather than a nation, which of course has many races and many faiths.
Yeah, I'm constantly told that, by the way. So when I had this debate on my LBC show, I was told by some callers that, Maajid, you can be British, but you can't be English because actually you're not white. And I said, I think you're mixing up Anglo-Saxon, white Anglo-Saxon with a nationality, with a country. England is, after all, a country. But there is still this debate, even within minority communities, who prefer to call themselves, say, British Pakistani over English, for the same reason. And I think it's partly because of the history.
If you go back to the... I last year watched the '66 World Cup final again, watched the tape of it. And what's interesting is the flag that was used there was not that one. It was the Union Jack.
Yeah.
You never see the Union Jack like you see the tricolour in all over France, or you see the Stars and Stripes all over America. We don't fly the flag here.
But in America, people are quite happy to be Italian Americans or German Americans. They're quite happy to say, look, I'm first of all American, but I'm of German descent, or I'm of Italian descent.
But you can never attack the flag. You can never disrespect the flag.
I think that the royal... I mean, we've got an image here from the from the royal wedding, and it shows that actually it did wonders for reviving the Union Jack there. And also, I think the Scots have always historically been quite proud to wave their own flag, as opposed to...
The Scots are much more nationalistic than we are. We've always kind of escaped the worst of nationalism, I think.
I'm going to ask you guys, all right? So if I were to ask you, what is your least and most favourite thing about England and being English? Because I think everyone around the table is strong English,
Mine is queuing. We queue all the time, and we don't ask questions. We stand there like dummies in a queue.
Is that your favourite or your...
And yeah, that's about the thing I hate about England. We just have these manners, which I don't think should be employed in that situation. There's 20 of you, and nobody says, why are we standing in this queue? It drives me nuts.
What's your most favourite thing? Say something good.
Say something good. Oh, no, I love...
I thought you loved queuing.
I hate queuing. I think it's the worst thing about... No, I love the things I mentioned before, the free speech, the democracy. I love individual things like our literature. I love our music, stuff, our achievements.
Let's quickly whip round. Michelle?
I hate queuing. I was in a queue till 2 o'clock this morning at border control, so I'm with you on that. I like the seasons.
Yes.
I really like the changing weathers.
Oh,
I
really?
like that. Yeah.
Wow. Greg?
I like the humour.
Yes.
And if you go through this list, is in the top one. I like the tolerance. I like that actually this is quite a tolerant society that adapts to change.
Yeah, it's true.
Rachel?
I'm very proud of our fantastic British press and also our great cup of tea. And you can never, ever get a good cup of tea anywhere else.
Oh, yeah, I like
Yorkshire
tea.
Yorkshire Gold.